So another pollution problem, environmental problem that I will be discussing is the climate change. So this um, issue begs the questions: how is environmental sustainability ensured while simultaneously addressing to the developing needs of the poor countries? So governments have their own environmental problems to deal with, no? But these states' ecological concerns become worldwide due to global warming, which transcend national boundaries. Global warming is a result of a billion of tons of carbon dioxide coming from coal burning power plants in transportation, various pollutants also, and other gases accumulating in the atmosphere. So these pollutants trap the sun's radiation, causing the warming of the Earth's surface. With the current amount of carbon dioxide and other gases, this greenhouse effect has speed up to the rise in the world temperature. So there is now a consensus that the global temperature has risen at a faster rate in the last 50 years, and it continues to go up despite efforts by climate change deniers that the world had pulled off in 1998. No? And this greenhouse effect, no, is responsible for recurring heat waves and long droughts in certain places, as well as for heavier rainfall and devastating hurricanes and typhoons in other countries. Until recently, California had experienced its worst water shortage in 1,200 years due to global warming. So this changed recently when storm drought rain in the drought stricken areas. So the result, however, the state is having some of its worst flash floods in the 21st century. In India and South Asia, global warming altered summer monsoon patterns, leading to the intermittent flooding that seriously affected food production and consumption, as well as infrastructure networks. Category 4 or 5 typhoons like Typhoon Haiyan that hit the central Philippines in 2013 had doubled and even tripled in some areas of the South Asian basins. Scientists claim that there will be more than typhoons in the coming years, and the eastern United States, the number of storms had also gone up, with Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and Hurricane Sandy in 2012 being the worst hurricane ever. Right? So, how about this? Are you familiar with these sites? So, glaciers. So, glaciers are melting every year since 2002, with Antarctica losing 134 billion metric of ice. So, there is coastal flooding not only in the United States eastern seaboard, but also in the Gulf of Mexico, and reefs in Australian Great Barrier Reef are dying, and the production capacities of farms and fisheries have been also affected. Flooding allowed more breeding grounds of disease carriers like Aedes aegypti mosquito and the cholera bacteria. So since human-made climate threatens the entire world, it is possibly the greatest present risk to humankind. So, with these environmental problems, more countries are recognizing um, more countries are now recognizing the perils of these problems, especially the global warming. So, so we have here um, in 1997, no, 192 countries signed the Kyoto Protocol. So, what is this protocol? This is to reduce the greenhouse gases following the 1992 United Nations Earth Summit, where a framework convention for climate change was finalized. So, what is this protocol? So, the protocol set targets, but it left to the individual countries to determine how best they would achieve um, these goals, while some countries have made a necessary move to reduce their contribution to global warming, like the United States, which is the biggest polluter in the world, is not joining the effort. So, developing countries lack the funds to implement the protocol. So, as many of them need international aid to get things moving. So in 2010, the World Bank report thus concluded that the protocol only had a slight impact on reducing global emissions. So because of non-binding nature of the Kyoto Protocol agreement. So the follow-up treaty to the protocol is the Paris Accord. So negotiated by 195 countries in December of 2015, the Paris Accord seeks to limit the increase in the global average temperature based on which has predetermined carbon dioxide emission limits per country. And the Paris Accord provides more leeway for countries to decide on their national targets, and it largely passed as international legislation because it emphasizes consensus building. So, but it is not clear whether this agreement, no, the Paris Accord, will have any more success than the Kyoto Protocol. So, another um, solution, accordingly, or ways to combat global warming or social movements that is happening across the world. So these social movements might be headed by some of the not NGOs, no, non-governmental organizations. Social movements, however, have a better success working together with some pressure of to pressure their government to regulate global warming. So in South Africa, communities engage in environmental activism to pressure industries to reduce their emission and lobby parliament for the passage of these pro-environmental laws. So across the Atlantic, in El Salvador, local officials and grassroots organizations from 1,000 communities push for crop diversification or a reduction of environmental sugar cane production, the protection of endangered sea species from the devastating effects of the commercial fishing, and the preservation of lowlands being eroded by deforestation up in the rivers and inconsistent release of water by from the nearby dam. Universities also partner with governments in producing attainable programs of controlling pollution. So the University of Chicago, for example, no, the University of Chicago's Energy Policy Institute sent teams to India to work with government offices, businesses, and communities in coming up with viable ground level projects that strike a balance between urgently needed economic growth and improved air quality. So, when these local alliances between the state, the school, and communities are replicated at the national level, the success becomes doubly significant. So in Japan, also population pressure forced the government to work with civil society groups, academia, and political parties to get the parliament to pass a blizzard of laws. So passed at once in what became known as the pollution diet of 1970. So these regulations did not eliminate environmental problems, but today Japan has some of the least polluted cities in the world. So the imperative now is for everyone to set up this kind of coalitions on a global scale. For at this point, when governments still hesitate in fully committing themselves to fight pollution, and when international organizations still lack the power to enforce anti-pollution policies, social coalitions that bring in village associations, academics, the media, local and national governments, and even international aid agencies together be the only way to reverse the worsening situation. Right. So these massive environmental problems are said to be um, difficult to resolve because governments believe that for their countries to be fully developed, they must be industrialized, urbanized, and inhabited by a robust middle class with access to the best of the modern abilities. So, a developed society accordingly also have provision for the poor jobs in the industrial sector, public transport system, and cheap food. Food depends on a country's free trade with other food producers, and it is also relies on a modernized agricultural sector in which toxic technologies such as fertilizers or pesticides and modified crops, examples are the high yielding varieties of rice, ensure maximized productivity. So, the model of this ideal modern society is the United States, which until 1970s was a global economic power. So, with a middle class that was the envy of the world. So, the United States, however, did not reach this high point without serious environmental consequences. And to this very day, it is the worst polluter in the history uh, of the world, responsible for the 27% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. And 60% of the carbon emission comes from the cars and other vehicles flying in American highways and roads. And the rest from the smoke and soot from coal factories, forest fires, as well as methane released by farms and breakdown of organic matter, paint, aerosols, and dust. So another mitigate environmental problems. Now, these consequences, however, are far from the mind of the countries like China, India, and Indonesia. So, which are now in the midst of frenzied effort to achieve and sustain economic growth to catch up with the West in the desire to develop and improve the standard of living of their citizens. These countries opt for the goals of economic growth and cheap energy, which in turn will encourage energy overconsumption, waste, and inefficiency, and also fuel environmental pollution. So this time, China is building an inner energy efficient, low carbon supply chain access to clean, carbon free energy resources. And India must far usher in a greener transportation system. So, using this EV, electronic vehicles, this such transportation will need an ecosystem of a car and the battery manufacturers along with charging infrastructure. In Jakarta, Indonesia, on the other hand, the state utility Perusahaan Listrik Negara is aiming to phase out coal-fired power as the country brings forward its carbon neutrality ambitions to 2060. So, on the other hand, the United States have also no, passed laws. The Environmental Protection Agency in the United States of America, which is an independent executive agency of the United States federal government, is tasked with environmental protection matters. So the agency conducts environmental assessment, research and education, and it is responsible in maintaining and enforcing national standard under a variety of environmental laws in consultation with state, tribal, and local governments. So it delegates some permitting, monitoring, and enforcement responsibility to United States and the federally recognized tribes. So these um, EPA enforcement powers include all levels of government in a wide variety of voluntary pollution prevention programs and energy conservation efforts. So today, like US, China, and India, most of the countries around the world have already made their efforts through establishing organization or government laws, regulation, and other policy mechanisms concerning environmental issues to achieve and sustain economic growth. So, while many other companies nowadays have implemented programs to reduce their environmental footprints, created thriving operations that benefit and positively impact the environment for a better life and have a for for a sustainable development. So, what is then a sustainable development really about? So, the global goals for sustainable, according to our common future, alright, okay. According to our common future, um, sustainable development requires meeting the basic needs of all and extending to all the opportunity to satisfy their aspirations for a better life of everybody. So, this sustainable development requires that societies meet human needs by increasing productive potential and by ensuring equitable opportunities for all. So, here are the global goals for sustainable developments. One is no poverty, zero hunger. Um, Three is good health and well-being. Four, quality education for all, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. Seven, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure. 10, reduce inequalities. 11, sustainable cities and communities. 12, responsible consumption and production. 13 is climate action. 14 is life below the water. 15, life on land. 16 is peace and justice, strong institutions. And 17, partnerships for the goal. So, in short, sustainable development is about eradicating poverty and closing the inequality gap both within countries and among countries. So it recommends a certain course of action that the government and the society can take to make this world a better place for all, not just for today's generation, but also for the future generation. So, um, perhaps perhaps no issue forces people to think about their role as a citizen of the world than environmental degradation. So every person, regardless of our race, our nation, our creed, we belong to the same world. So when we look at the image of the earth, we will realize that we belong to a one world, a world that increasingly vulnerable. So in the fight against climate change, we cannot afford to simply care about our own backyard. So for example, the carbon dioxide emitted in one country may have severe effects on the climate of the other. So there is no choice but to find global solution because this is a global problem. So, environmental problem is a global problem. So, another global problem to be discussed next meeting is, or next video will be about the food security. So, I think that would be all. Have a good day, everyone.